Okay, so as we all know, we start at the same place every week, and we end at a different place every week. But where we're starting at, I've got the thickness of my pen a little too large. Just one second here. We start with T, E, A. And T stands for, and we'll go through this quickly, those of you that have been through this, we'll just take 30 seconds to go through it. Thoughts stand for, T stands for thoughts, E stands for emotions, and A stands for actions. And so our actions come from our emotions, and our emotions come from our thoughts. And so when we think about the concept of obedience, normally we think about the concept of obedience as being changing our actions, okay? And unfortunately what happens is many times we try to change these actions but not think about the impact of what's happening underneath. And as we mentioned many times, Jesus does an incredible job explaining this through a little parable of the tree, where he says the roots of the tree really tell the health of the fruit. And so these would be considered our roots, and this would be considered like our fruit. The outside of us, the healthiness of the outside of what people see comes from how healthy the inside. And so we don't spend an enormous amount of time here in our webinars talking about actions because what we're concerned about is what's going on here and then what's going on here. And our emotions, what they do is they simply tell us what our spiritual temperature is. And we refer to Galatians 5 when we talk about these emotions. In Galatians 5, 23, 22, that area, we know that the fruit of the Spirit is love, peace, patience, joy, goodness. Those kind of, when we're experiencing that kind of stuff, then we know we're lining up with God. We're lining up with a thought that's based on truth. We're lining up with a thought that's based on God. Of course, up here we have an entire list of what they call the deeds of the flesh, idolatry, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, envy, all these things. Okay, those emotions are coming from what we're thinking, but they're not based on something that's based on what's God's truth. It's based on what we call a lie, what psychologists call cognitive distortions, and what in the spiritual world we would call lies. And in particular, the verse we like to use to talk about this is when you are of your father the devil and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning. So here we're talking about the devil, Jesus is, and he says whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. And so what we realize is that when we get up in the morning, we have this battle going on. And this battle, let's go down here to, yeah, okay. And so we get this language in Ephesians 6, and Paul writes to the church of Ephesus, he says, be strong in the Lord, put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the darkness power. Okay, basically what's happening here is Paul saying this is like a daily battle because every day the goal of the enemy is to get you to buy into lies. That's his goal, is to shoot these lies at your thought life and to get you to think something that's not true. Why? Because then he knows he can decimate your emotions, which are ultimately going to cause disobedience. It's also ultimately going to cause actions that are unhealthy. He loves this stuff. That's what the father of lies is all about. So what we do is we take time and we go through what we call the 4 steps. Now, there's nothing magical about the 4 steps. All we're doing is we're trying to utilize this concept, this parable of the tree, and put it in some sort of a method that we can get our hands around. There's nothing magical about the method. There's other methods. There's other ways of doing this. This is just one way. And all we do is we just identify the unhealthy emotion. And when we identify, and this could be any unhealthy emotion that you've experienced in the last couple of weeks, and you can start typing them in right now into the chat box, sending them on to Brent. But why do we identify the unhealthy emotion? Because these are the areas, like I said, where we can take our spiritual temperature. Galatians 5, it says, look, if you're experiencing rage, this isn't something that's coming from God, so it helps us identify areas to work on in our life. It helps us identify unhealthy areas that we can then go after. Number 2 is we simply identify the thought. Why? Well, because we know if we're thinking if we're having an unhealthy emotion, something that's not coming from God, it's coming from something we're thinking. And it's not coming from God, it's coming from these lies. And so if we can identify this thought, we can identify this lie, now we have something to attack. And so when Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians, I think it's 10:5, he says, take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. What he's saying there is he's saying, look, these thoughts that are coming in, grab them. And that's all we're doing, is we're taking the thought captive. And how we do that is we write it down. We grab it and take hold of it and identify it. And the third thing we do is we move to taking that thought, which is the lie, and asking ourselves, is that really true? And then moving ourselves into what is the truth, identifying the truth as opposed to what's the lie. And then number 4, Romans 12:2 says, be transformed by renewing of your mind. The renewal process is thinking or renewing our minds on what is true. Remember, truth, if we grab it, is God. And so we're renewing our minds on God. This is very critical. I can't say this enough. I can't say this enough, but here's the deal. When you are renewing your mind on truth, it's changing you. But since truth is God, God is truth, it's not you that's changing yourself. It's God that's changing you. This is very important. This is not some sort of humanistic, positive thinking way of changing my life. That's not the way this works. If we think we, in our own effort, can somehow do something to change our lives to be closer to God, we're sadly mistaken. The sanctification process does not happen by our own human effort. It happens by God's power. Galatians 3:3 says this, are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are you now being perfected in the flesh? In other words, can your life be perfected in obedience by your own human thoughts, human effort? No, it can't. What began in the Spirit, in other words, when you were saved by the Spirit, but now moving towards obedience also comes by the Spirit. And the Spirit is what reveals this truth. And as we grab this truth of God, this truth changes us. We don't change ourselves. And so different weeks we emphasize different parts of this, but that's the part I think it was important to emphasize tonight. So go ahead and send the unhealthy emotion in. We'll grab a few, write them down if you have those already, and if you've already sent them in, start sending in your thought. Brent, what do we have?
Yeah, first one we have is would be impatience.
Okay.
And the thought behind it, basically the concept is road rage.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So
we've all had that.
We could say, he should not flip me off. Okay. Or another one, I remember when I was talking with somebody about road rage sometime, and I think it was just, the thought was he's an idiot, probably because he cut him off or something. So what's the second one?
Okay, the second one I have on here would be doubt.
Okay.
Now I'm looking to see if we have the thought behind the doubt yet.
Okay.
Still don't have that one in yet. Let's go on to the next one. Let's see.
Hey, Derek.
Yeah, Steve.
You know, people who drive faster than you are idiots. People that drive slower than you are morons. Just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you for yeah. Thank you for that clarification.
We got another one that would be fear.
Okay.
And the thought is, because my husband's looking at porn, he doesn't love me.
Oh, that's a good one. My husband looks at porn, so he doesn't love me. Okay. I'm actually working with a guy right now on a book about porn, so it'll be interesting to see when that gets done how that all works out. Number 4.
Well, we've got another one which would be pride, but I think the pride was connected to the road rage. Guys, go ahead and type. I'm not getting a whole bunch of people typing stuff in, so let's go.
All right, let's see. I want to put one more in.
The one for pride says, I'm more important than you.
Oh, okay. I'm more important than you. Okay, I talked to a guy a couple days ago, and I want to add this one to the list because it seemed like it was so prevalent, maybe. I've heard it a lot. But he was angry, and he was angry because his child brought home a bad grade. This guy has a son, and his son brought home a bad grade from school. So the thought was, of course, going to be something like, my son is getting an F, and that's horrible, or some such thing. Okay. Anything to add to the doubt?
No, I've got on the anger. I have. Why does my ex always have to mess with me when it comes to the kids? Let's see.
Okay.
Oh yeah, here we go. On the doubt, I do have one. I am not sure that what God says is true because my experience has been the opposite.
Oh, that's a really good one. I like that.
That's a big one.
I'm not sure God says, not sure what God says is true.
I'm not sure that what God says is true because my experience has been the opposite.
My experience is the opposite.
That's a big one.
Okay, yeah, that's not one that's not one that you hear a lot, but it's one that's very powerful. So
now let me see.
Cool.
We had someone raise their hand a second ago. Let me see. Whoever had their hand raised, I just unmuted you. Are you there?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes, gotcha.
Okay. I'm new on this, Brent. Where do I type in the questions? Do I have to raise my hand before I, like, list, like, impatient, doubt, fear?
No, all you have to do is when you type the question into the box.
Where do I type in the question at?
Derek, where's it?
Yeah, there should be a box on the upper right-hand side around the area where the little hand button is.
It says questions.
Yeah.
That you should be able to click into and then type something.
Sometimes that gets hidden by your whiteboard, Derek, and you have to click on one of the blue bars kind of things.
I see an orange arrow and then a box and then the hand, and that's all I have.
So can you go ahead.
Click on the arrow.
Click on the arrow.
And it'll open that box up for you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, guys. Okay.
No problem.
No problem.
Welcome back.
Okay.
You're on. Go.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
No,
great.
right, go ahead.
Great question. Great question. Is that all you needed, Pam? Apparently so. I think she's muted. All right.
Yes, for now. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Go ahead and mute her back up.
Got it.
And I'll try to mention that in the future about that whole arrow thing, Brent, if you'll remind me. But that makes sense. If you don't click on the arrow, you can't see the whole thing. Okay. Okay, guys. Thanks a lot. We've got plenty to work with here tonight. We're going to hammer off a few of these, or hammer out a few of these, I think is what I should say. We're not going to, we're just going to hit a few of these here and there, and then we'll spend a little longer time on maybe one or two of them. So we'll grab the download sheet real quick, and if you noticed, on the download sheet, what it does is it actually lists what we call the Lives Transforming Worksheet. It lists all these different emotions. So sometimes I find myself, especially, grabbing the emotion is sometimes even harder than finding the thought. So this kind of helps me. It just gives me a bunch of emotions to choose from, and I'm always a little better with multiple choice than short answers. So, but we've got those already. Now, when we come down here, we start seeing what I call these distortions. Now, if you remember last week, and I'll review this with you real quick. I really like this new little deal going on here.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, got an upgraded whiteboard. Okay, just so you know where we're at in all this. Okay. Somebody emailed me the other day and said, is there any way you can type on that whiteboard because your handwriting is horrible?
If you've never used one, they're hard.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how to do that. Okay. Now we're going to kind of use this. What we're doing here is we have identified the emotion, and so we're going to. What we're going to do is we're going to. Whoops. Shoot. Like impatience or doubt or fear, and that's what's landing right here. Of course, out of that, we could literally spend the next 10 minutes and talk about, well, if I'm thinking he's an idiot or he should not have flipped me off, and now that makes me impatient or angry, then what would my action be? Okay, now we're not doing that, but you can easily tell what would come out of that is probably not going to be the healthiest of actions. All right? You could do the same thing for doubt. I'm not sure what God said is true. My experience is the opposite, so then I feel doubt, and then out of that there's going to be actions that could be very unhealthy. Same with this. My thought is my husband looks at porn, that means he doesn't love me. And so that makes my emotion fear, and then out of that fear comes what? Healthy actions or unhealthy actions, much more highly like probability that they're going to be unhealthy. And so that's how this pattern works out, or kind of works. What we've done here is identify the thoughts. Now within these thoughts, which is we're right here, are where we find the distortions. And that's what we're going to look at right now, just for a few seconds. Okay? But ultimately what we've got to do is we've got to get back to the belief. And that's what we spend the rest of the time on. Because if we can change the paradigms, if we can change our beliefs, that's what really gives you a foundation of healthiness all the way through this triangle. Okay? But for now, just so you know, I'm kind of a guy that I'm kind of like math guy, so I like to know where I'm at in the triangle. Here's where you're at in the triangle. We're right here at this point. We haven't gone back to the beliefs yet. We're just looking for the distortions. And so we'll come back over here and we can say impatience. If somebody said he's an idiot, what would that distortion be? Well, there's 10 or 12 different distortions that we've identified on this sheet. Am I saying that these are the only 10 to 12, these are the only distortions in the universe? Absolutely not. These are just common distortions that we see in the Bible, and we also see in psychology. In many ways, they very much line up. For instance, psychology would suggest, for instance, predicting the future deception. They would call this a cognitive distortion, that a person thinks they can predict the future is a distortion, and it causes worry, for instance. Well, that's what the psychology community would say. Well, boom. Go over to James chapter 4, verse 13. I like going to the message. Now I have a word for you who brashly announced today or tomorrow we're going to go off to such and such a city, we're going to go start a business, make a lot of money. You don't know the first thing about tomorrow. So you see the connection here. Here, psychologists would say this is a distortion. You can't predict the future. The Bible says it's a distortion. It's a lie. If you think you know tomorrow, you're lying to yourself. And if you think you can predict the future, it's not true. It's not based on something that's true. Okay? So that's the connection. So when we look at impatience and angry, and we say, he's an idiot, if we would take a few minutes and look down through some of these distortions, we're going to find there's some that fit. And the one that might fit this one would be this name-calling deception. Okay? The fact of the matter is, or psychologists might call this labeling. James, of course, you can just go right back to James. He has a lot to say in the book of James about the words you use. And when we use words that label people, when we use words that are nasty, that kind of the treacherous stuff that can come out of it, In this particular case, it gets really difficult because what makes you mad is that you say he's an idiot. The problem is trying to define something like that becomes very difficult, because then you end up saying, well, an idiot is a person, and then you go back to what Steve was saying earlier. Well, an idiot is a person who's driving too fast, or a moron's a person who's driving too slow, and all of a sudden, then you got to figure out, well, how fast is too fast and how slow is too slow, and we realize these labels really don't mean anything. They just are like electrically charged particles to emotionally freak us out, all right? And so the name calling really doesn't serve any purpose, and in fact, it's a distortion because there's nothing we can really grab onto there that means anything. Okay, here, number 2. Again, we're going to kind of fly through these relatively quickly. Number 2, I'm not sure what God says is true because my experience is opposite of that. So where would that fit? This is called what I would call emotional deception. An example of that is, I feel bad, so life is bad. In other words, it's the belief that if I feel something, then it must be true. It's something that isn't necessary. This is such... I'm kind of wanting to get off on a tangent here, so I'm stuttering a little bit. But there was like a whole set of philosophy back in around the 1700s, which is basically saying, if we can't experience something, then it must not be true. But we can really throw all kinds of wrenches into that philosophical perspective. Okay? Just because we feel bad doesn't mean something is bad that's happening. So, you know, a classic example of that is me. I can give you an example in my life. I remember when this has been years ago, but I felt horrible. I felt horrible for a week because I knew that I was going to get a test on my liver. The problem is that my mind, I felt horrible about that, but the fact is when I got tested, there was nothing wrong with my liver. And so I felt bad, but that didn't but I wasn't bad. You see what I'm saying? And so the experiences of life, the feelings of life, how we feel about something, doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It doesn't necessarily mean it's based on anything that's true, but this is something that's very common. In other words, I feel it, so it must be true. That would be the distortion. That would be the deception. Now, again, we haven't gone back to the belief yet, so we haven't really got to the crux of it, but we're seeing the distortions that we have within these thoughts. Fear. My husband looks at porn, so he doesn't love me. Okay. What this does, let's go through these here. There's all kinds of distortions that can come in and around this. It depends on you. One person could have this same sentence and come up with different distortions going around your mind than someone else. And so just because I bring up one thing that may apply to this sentence doesn't mean that this is the one that applies to you. But in particular, for instance, my husband looks at porn, so he doesn't love me. This could be a mind-reading deception. You could be thinking he doesn't love you, but really he still does. It could be predicting the future deception. You could be thinking that he's not going to love you if he keeps looking at porn, when he may not. You could be...
I mean, that could be a never and always as well.
It could definitely be never and always. The blaming myself deception. I've seen a lot of women blame themselves for their husbands looking at porn. Okay, and then again, I've seen the concept of blaming others. In other words, let me show you how this works. We need to be careful with this. My husband looks at porn. What do you mean? How could that mean? It's not my fault he's looking at porn. Well, I totally agree. But what you are doing is you're blaming him for not loving you when we don't have any facts that that's the case at this point. Now, if you do have facts that that's the case, then we've got to come up with a different statement. We can't say my husband looks at porn so he doesn't love me. We have to say, no, he doesn't love me, period. Okay? And so this, what we would call this, although it's not really in here, but it's kind of the basis of a couple of these, is jumping to conclusions. That would be the distortion. We're concluding that the porn is doing something, but we don't know that the porn is really doing that. Okay? Now again, these are the little thought distortions that play into our mind. Now, the fact of the matter is, he may not love you. and he may be looking at porn, but concluding that because he's looking at porn, he must not love me is what we would call jumping to conclusions distortion. Anger, my son is getting an F, and that's horrible. Again, this could this could certainly be playing up deception. Certainly it's not good to get Fs, but at the same time, to suggest that your son is horrible because he's getting Fs, or suggest that you're a horrible parent because he's getting Fs, or suggest that life in general is horrible because my son brought home an F, is certainly could be a distortion that could really kind of wreak havoc on us. Okay, pride, I'm more important than you. I would suggest that without question this is a playing up deception, which means that I'm playing up how great I am compared to you. All right, and when we start looking at the beliefs that support some of these things, we'll see how kind of they fall out. Now normally, and again with tonight, we don't have time to go through all the paradigms and all the belief systems that we would have that would support these kind of things. But if we scroll on down, we'll be able to see some of the beliefs, some of the paradigms that we have built within our DNA that are underlying, oops, I'm sorry about that. Let me get you back on the screen here. That are underlying these thoughts, okay? So if we scroll back over here, now what's going on down here, things like, let's use an example here. Things like, my achievements make me more valuable, okay? Well, when we take something like that and you apply it to your son who brought home an F, now all of a sudden you can see where that belief system is supporting all this anger you have towards your son, or whatever you might have, frustration or whatever towards your son, getting a bad grade. If we go back to, I'm going to scrunch this over just a tad. Whoops, sorry about that. There we go. All right, so if we go back to this one, which is my husband looks at porn so he doesn't love me, all of a sudden there's all kinds of paradigms that this could be based on. One is comparing yourself. Sometimes it's easy for women to start comparing themselves with the women that their husband are looking at, okay, and suggesting that their value is somehow based on comparing themselves with some other person. Over here, we have another paradigm, which is, and I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, but the moment we have other people's opinions making me more or less valuable, we get into trouble. Even when the opinion of that person, and especially when the opinion of that person is your spouse. And so when we base our own value, our own worth on whether someone else happens to get up and love us or like us on a particular day, we're living in a paradigm that's not based on what we would call truth. Okay? Now, I know we went through this quickly, and understanding all that may not make a lot of sense, and so what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little time grabbing one of these and dissecting it so we can understand it more. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to grab this one that I had this conversation with this guy a couple days ago about his son and the Fs. So what I'd like to do is pull over here and all right, when I start drawing more than one thing on the screen, it can get really treacherous here. Okay, so here's the situation. The situation is we're going to give these guys some names. We're going to say Bob is the dad and Dave is the son, David. Okay, and so the situation we have is we have a circumstance, and everything, all these things happen usually, not all the time, but many times happen because of a circumstance. And so that's why on the Lives Transforming worksheet, scroll up, you'll see, I'll scrunch this down. That's not even a word, but I'll make this smaller. Right up here, the challenge. This is the challenge because there's many times an event that kind of starts this whole thing off. The challenge with this particular event is the fact that David comes into Bob and says, Dad, I need you to sign this paper that my teacher's making you sign, and Bob realizes it's his teacher making him sign a document that's telling Bob that David is flunking a class. So this is kind of what starts it all off. And so that's the circumstance. David is flunking algebra or something. I don't even remember what class was being flunked here. So that's the setup. Now, here's the thing. When we look at what the thoughts are, if this dad has a paradigm, what we're doing this week is we're going backwards a little bit, or what I call forwards. If he has a paradigm that says, my achievements make me more valuable, if he understands his life like that, it would be a natural next step for him to believe that if his son does better, then that makes him better. Why would that be the case? Because it's easy to believe, it's an easy lie to buy into, an easy paradigm to buy into, that says, if my son does well, then that makes me a better parent. And if my son does poorly, then I'm a poor parent. So what I'm doing is I'm connecting my worth and value as a person with how well of a parent I am. Thus, I'm connecting my worth and value as a person based on how well my son does. Okay? My son's performance. So I'm extrapolating, not just going through emotional stress because I'm thinking if I don't do good enough, then that makes me less valuable, and that causes me worry, stress, anxiety. Now I'm basically extending this onto my son, or I'm saying to myself, I'm not a good enough parent. My son brings home an F, then I'm a bad parent. Based on a parent, and then that's the thought. I'm a bad parent. Now, why am I saying I'm a bad parent? Because I have a paradigm that says if my son gets bad grades, that makes me less of a parent. I'm not, and the fact of the matter is, my worth comes from how well of a parent I am, and so literally, naturally, my thought's going to be, okay, I'm a horrible parent. Okay, that's going to make me feel absolutely lousy. Now, this is the fun one, because what I want you to do is type in the box, okay? You have a paradigm that says if your son brings home a bad grade, then that makes you a bad parent. And further, if you're a bad parent, that makes you less valuable as a human being. You're not worth as much. It takes a bite out of your worth and value as a human. So with that in mind, you're thinking that way. You have a belief system that says that parenting is what makes you valuable. You have a thought that says, now I'm a bad parent, as soon as the circumstance of flunking algebra comes in. You're feeling totally lousy at this point because you're feeling like a horrible parent. So now tell me, just write in the little box and send to Brent. What are you going to do? This is the action. This is the action part. If you're in this emotional state, thought, life, and paradigm, tell me what your action is going to be.
What's your action going to be, guys? Here's the first one coming in, getting angry at my child.
Okay. So the emotion is going to be anger. Now, what's your action going to be? Derek, what do you think the action is going to be?
Yeah, there's going to be some kind of punishment for the kid.
Okay. And what might that look like? Like if this would have happened with your dad or mom, what would that have looked like?
Oh, I would have been grounded or shamed.
Okay, shamed.
That's a good one.
All right,
Yeah,
very
some
good.
kind of an emotional consequence, you know, push them away, cut them out of your time. I mean, one of those, you know, emotional consequences.
Okay.
Yeah,
Not speak, you know, like a withhold.
Okay.
Yeah, not speaking to someone would be like a withhold.
Okay, so you could not speak. Now, my dad would have just yelled. So you could start yelling at them. It would be common to threaten them. Okay? The other thing, I don't have room up here, would be to control them. What would control look like? Control would look like, now you're going to do this, you're going to bring your book home every night, you're going to be studying every night, and you're going to do this and this and this, or you're not going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and you're going to do that. In other words, this becomes like a little, sergeant dictator. Okay? Now, the action that you may have out of this paradigm is not, it may be different than what somebody else would do. Certain personalities would lend themselves to just not speaking, especially if you don't want conflict in your house. You might be one that's just like, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm not going to say anything. I don't even want to talk about it. You might be somebody that threatens, or you might be somebody that controls, or you might be somebody that shames. Now, here's the thing, before we even go on, that I want you to think about for a second with me. These are very natural actions that come out of this paradigm, that if I'm a better parent, then I'm a better person. My worth and value are connected to my parenting. So I'm going to erase this and make it more clear. Okay. Here's the belief, here's the belief that my worth is connected to my parenting. Okay. So now, if that's the case, this is taking a chunk out of how I feel about myself. It's making me feel like a bad parent. Now I'm angry. Now I feel lousy. Now I shame them. Okay? Now, we're going to imagine for a minute that instead of David, give me a girl's name that starts with a D.
Debbie.
Diane. Debbie or Diane. Okay, good. Now, I want you to think about this logically with me for a second, because this is very important. If your worth equals your parenting, and you feel like, and you think I'm a bad parent, and you're feeling lousy, and the action that comes out of you is, I can't believe you did this, and you have a Diane that you're talking to, and a Diane is a person, now all of a sudden she feels so shamed by this, that what she does is she complies. She does everything she can possibly do to comply. She says, okay, I'll do whatever you say, because don't shame me. I don't want you to tell me I'm a bad person. And so if you're going to tell me I'm a bad person and you're going to shame me, then I'm going to comply. I'm going to do what you say. Now listen, guys, this doesn't sound like that bad of a deal when Diana's 10 years old. But what I want you to do is fast forward a 10-year-old Diane to a 17-year-old Diane that's lived a life that she's been shamed. And when she's shamed, she knows the next thing she needs to do is comply. So, when someone withholds their love and shames, her job is to comply. Now we have Diane that's 17. Diane goes on a date. Diane goes on a date with a guy named Mark. Mark figures Diane out. Mark starts shaming Diane. Diane starts to what?
Comply.
Comply.
Give him what he wants.
This is the risk. This is what's the result of us believing these lies. Okay? That's what's at risk. We do not want to create an environment where we live in this shame and are controlled and manipulated by other people. Thus we comply. Nor do we want to extend this shame in a way that moves Diane to get in the car with Mark to start shaming her, so then she complies and goes right back into this cycle again. So you can see how kind of dangerous this process becomes. Now, here's the thing though. We don't want to take this metaphor too far, because if Diane goes that direction, it's really, really dangerous. However, we can never forget, Diane gets to choose what she thinks. She gets a choice, which is going to come up very clearly over here in the next section. Here's a different person. This person believes that their worth doesn't come from their parenting, which means, and in fact, their worth, and we're not going to go through this because you can go back through the last 5 webinars to understand this connection from our value and worth, not being from parenting, not being from our husbands, not being from our wives, not being from anybody other than God. The God of the universe, and again, I'm not going to spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes on this because we've covered it so many times in the past. Just grab another webinar. But here's the deal. When you ask God into your life, the God of the universe came into your spirit. The spirit is the real you. Your spirit is the eternal you. Your spirit is the thing that's going to live forever. He came into your life. He totally completed you. Your worth is because God is in you. And Him being in you, you get the righteousness of God. That's a big fancy word for saying you get the value of God in you. That's where your value and worth comes from, not from your parenting. Whether you are a good parent or a bad parent, your worth does not change. Here's the paradox. When your son comes home and says, I'm flunking algebra, you don't have a chunk taken out of your value and worth. So you don't say to yourself, I'm a bad parent. You don't say to yourself, that's horrible, I'm a bad parent, because if he got a bad grade, that makes me a horrible parent. That doesn't happen. Instead, the thought is more like, oh, wonder what's up with David. See, it turns to David and it doesn't turn to you. Do you see how this turns to you? David's the one flunking algebra and you're all concerned about yourself over here because your worth is connected to your parenting. And so this becomes all about you. This starts to become about David. This doesn't have to come about you because you're not connecting your worth with parenting. So now instead of feeling lousy, you feel something, okay, maybe not joy, but you're certainly not feeling anger. You're certainly not feeling lousy. And to a certain degree, you just you're curious about, wonder what's going on with him. So clearly there's some concern. There's some compassion about, empathy. Oh my gosh, there's certainly empathy that can come about here. But to feel angry and lousy doesn't have to happen. Why doesn't it have to happen? Because you're not thinking it's about you. You're not thinking, I'm a bad parent. You don't have to feel lousy about yourself. Okay. So then if you're feeling this way, what would be the natural extension of actions that would come out of this paradigm? Any ideas?
You move toward the child. What's going on?
Okay. So you'd get into their world.
You want to help the child.
You'd listen. You'd move towards them to listen. Derek, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're in that healthy spot, you can actually focus on that other person and determine what's best for them.
Okay. Yeah, because you're focusing on them, right? And so we end up listening to the child. We can then extend and try to figure out, okay, how can I help the child? See, over here, you're not thinking about helping the child. You're thinking about somehow getting the child to do what you want them to do, controlling them in a way that will make you feel better. That's what happens when we have a belief system not based on God, but based on a lie. See, this is a huge lie. It's a lie that says my worth and value comes from something other than God. But over here, this says, no, wait a second. My worth and value doesn't come from whether I'm a great parent or a bad parent, good parent. That's not where my worth comes from. My value comes from God. So now I don't have to focus on myself. I then wonder, what's going on with David? And yes, I've got some concern, but it's an empathetic concern. It's a concern, but you're not aroused. It's almost like a peaceful concern, a healthy concern. And so the action out of this would become certainly listening, certainly helping. That would make all the sense in the world. Okay? Now, the natural tendency, though, is, and you as well as I know, the natural tendency, I'm going to draw a big rectangle up here. If you're believing, we're going to call this A, and we're going to call this B. If you're living in this paradigm of A, okay, remember that certainly it could be that achievements make me more valuable, okay? However, it could be based on a paradigm that's not that. It could be a different paradigm for you. It could be that my value is based on comparing myself with others. And I can't stand the thought of my kid not being as good as my neighbor's kid. And so this comparison game comes about. And that's the basis. That's the foundation or paradigm you're living from. Another paradigm that is not based on truth. Or how about this one? If I never have any problems, then I'm more valuable. I have a problem now, so that makes me less valuable. Again, another paradigm that's not true. If other people do what I want, then I'm more valuable. Okay, this is a total control perspective. If I can get my child to do what I want them to do, then that makes me a good parent. So it's based on a lie that says controlling and manipulating someone else is somehow going to fulfill me. Again, the only fulfillment and completeness that can come is from God. Anything else is based on a lie. There's a few more up here that you might be grabbing onto. Other people's opinions make me more valuable. What are people going to think if they find out my son's got an F? That would make their opinion of me go down. That would be horrible because their opinion of me is what makes me valuable. Another lie, another paradigm that's a lie. Or pleasing others, or other people love me, make me more valuable. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier in reference to the porn thing. So you can start to see the challenges that you have, because this paradigm here, I just grabbed my worth is connected to my parenting. But you can see how it could be other people's opinions, it could be pleasing other people, making them like you, it could be achievement issue, it could be comparing yourself to others, and I'm sure there's other things not on my list here. These are just common things, common what I would call paradigms based on lie paradigms. Enemy lies is what I have written up here, that we base our thought processes on. Now, we don't know for sure for you which one it is. I just picked this one, worth equals parenting, but it could be any one of these things. Okay? And what happens when you're in this paradigm A is that something like this happens. We get to believing that when David gets an F, then it's whose fault? In paradigm A, who do we believe is the fault of getting of David getting the F?
It's my fault.
Well, we believe it's the parent.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. And so in this particular case, Bob, when David gets an F, then it's Bob's fault. This would be the thought. So Bob, another way of saying it is Bob would say to me, and it's my fault David got an F. Now you see how he got, do you see how he got to that logic? That logic says, look, my worth equals my parenting. If he's getting an F, I'm a bad parent. I'm the reason, if I was a good parent, he wouldn't be getting an F. Thus, he's getting an F because of me, and I'm responsible for his F. Do you see the logic? But the logic
Absolutely.
But the logic is totally flawed. Okay? Why? Because the paradigm is based on something that's totally flawed. And how do we know this logic is flawed? Because what do you think Bob said when I asked Bob this? I said, Bob, so when David gets an A, then who got the A?
The child.
No, wait a second.
Bob's point of view, it was Bob's fantastic parenting skills that got the A.
Right. But see,
Exactly.
But we're starting to see how ridiculous this is becoming. Because when I ask Bob, well, has he ever gotten an A? And Bob says, well, yeah, he's got an A. And I pat him on the back and go, well, you got the A. Well, no, I didn't get the A. David got the A. So you mean you got the F, but David got the A? I mean, see how ridiculous this is? Okay. Why is this happening? It's because it's very, very easy. When we're buying into these lies, what we do is we end up totally, we cannot see. It's very difficult to see who's responsible for what. Okay? because we're buying into a lie to begin with that somehow his performance, your child's performance, is responsible for your parenting, which is responsible for your value, which is all based on stuff that doesn't make any sense. It's not based on any truth, okay? It's based on flawed logic. It's not based on any of God's truth, because God's truth is simply this. Your value comes from me. It doesn't come from any of that. So then we have to get totally confused about the responsibility of it all, okay? When David gets an A, then it's David? No. See, or is it Bob? Well, Bob would have to think it's him, but Bob never thinks it's him. I mean, when have you ever heard a parent say that? And when have you ever heard a parent say, hey, just wanted to let you know, my son got an A. How do you think I did? No, we don't go there. We can't go there. It doesn't make any sense to our logical mind, but the enemy desperately moves us to here. Oh, if he gets an A, it's David's deal. If he gets an F, it's Bob. You're the one that's at fault. Why? Because it's all flawed based on this underlying paradigm that's based on one of these huge enemy lies. I don't know which one of them is your lie, but it's usually based on one of these lies. And if it's not based on one of these, it's based on some other lie, because we can't have the A paradigm right here. We can't have this A paradigm coming out of God's truth, because it doesn't line up with the fruit of the Spirit. It doesn't line up with the character and attributes of God. Okay. Now we start to, this is where many times we, again, really get challenged with this. My husband looks at porn, so he doesn't love me. So we start coming back here and we start trying to figure out who's responsible for what, how does this work? Wait, now, if he's looking at porn, is that because he's doing something wrong, or is it because am I responsible for him looking at porn? See, these are very common deceptions that occur within this lie, okay? Now, why would it be easy to go there? Because if a woman is saying to herself, my value is somehow connected with the love of my spouse, then my worth equals my spouse's love, okay? So it would be the same kind of thing. So my value is coming from my spouse and the love of my spouse. Now all of a sudden, if you can see how easy this translates into, if my husband looks at porn, then that makes me less of a spouse. And so then I got to think to myself, and there's a million lies that can come out here. Okay, anything from should statements, he shouldn't be doing that, to I must not be good looking enough. There's a million things that can come out of here. Those are the kind of lies, distortions that would usually come into here, which then naturally makes, let's use this one. Sometimes I even hate using them because there's so many of them, and it's almost like I can hear people on the webinar saying, well, I don't think that. Well, okay, I know you don't think that, but you're thinking something, and that something is based on a lie if you're connecting your worth and value to the love that your spouse is giving to, and not basing your worth and value based on God. But here, a natural thing is my worth equals my spouse. And so here the thought would be something like, I'm not good looking enough. That's why he's looking at that stuff. Okay, which I've heard women say before. Again, may not be what you would say, but I've heard women say that. So of course they're going to feel totally lousy about themselves. And what's the action that come out of that? Well, it's kind of the same stuff. Shamed, control, yelling, not speaking. See what I'm saying? So what we find is that the natural response from finding our worth and value from something other than God in all these things takes on this same kind of natural kind of reactions. Okay, and then we get confused over who's responsible for what. All right. Now I can be very confident in saying.
Derek, you know what this feels like to me is this feels like that illustration, almost like the invisible dog fence. You know, this whole thing of we have these boundaries we're allowed to have freedom we can move around in. And we start to know when things aren't going right because we feel the unhealthy emotions when we get too close to what's not good. But people are watching us and saying, wait a minute, God's boundaries aren't working for that person, obviously, because they're acting out. And so what we try to do is we try to box them in even a smaller fence around them. I mean, that's just and what it does is it begin to control and manipulate the person, which ends up a lot of times driving them even further away.
Yeah. Let me spend just 3 or 4 minutes on that, and then maybe we can expand that further because that's such a big topic. But think about paradigm A, okay, and then think about paradigm B, where all of a sudden this porn thing does not become about you. How does that change what you're thinking? How does that change what you're feeling? And how does that change your actions? And all of a sudden, is it possible to go from controlling, shaming, yelling, threatening, and anger, even in this environment of porn, which is so rampant right now, and so emotionally charged, by the way, is it possible to move from this side to this side? And is it possible to work towards helping and listening? Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think trying to help David not get an F, or listening to what's really being challenged to him, do you think helping David not get an F is condoning him getting an F? Yes or no?
Absolutely not.
No.
So let me ask you this. Do you think helping a spouse and listening to a spouse regarding the porn as opposed to shaming, controlling, and yelling, do you think that's condoning porn?
No.
Okay. I want to make that very clear, because what will sometimes come out of people's mouths when we talk about this electrically charged concept of porn, help him, try to understand him, try to engage. What do you mean? Just let him get by with it? What are you talking about? See, this is not at all condoning porn, nor any more than this is condoning getting an F on a report card. Okay? So I want to make that very clear, because it's so easy to get trapped into that. We want to go over here and say, no, I'm not going to condone it. I'm going to control, shame, and yell and threaten and get angry. Look, this is no way not to condone an F. This is not condoning an F, nor is this condoning porn. All right, but it is different. And I can tell you this, for those of you struggling with this very difficult issue, that I have seen over and over again what I would consider to be unbelievably courageous, as the only word I can think of, women who have moved their worth completely over to God, realized, look, him looking at porn is no reflection on me. That's his issue. Back to the responsibility thing. Moved into a healthy emotional state, okay? And from that healthy emotional state, moved into listening, moved into engaging your spouse in a productive, helping assistance way. Not condoning the F, but assisting. And it has been absolutely, I mean, these are the kind of stories that I get to hear once in a while that almost bring you to tears in such an emotionally charged atmosphere of porn in this day and age. So I know this is a challenging topic for many people, and so I'm very sensitive to that. But the same principles apply. As soon as we start grabbing our worth from our spouse, in other words, somebody else's love makes me more valuable, we are going in that moment to move down this A path. Okay? We're going to think things that are going to be focused on us, and we're going to feel horrible about it, and we're going to act in ways that's going to naturally respond in an unhealthiness. Why? Because somehow we've connected our love, the love of our spouse, to our value as a person. So what Brent mentioned with his invisible dog fence, we don't really have time to talk about. But maybe in the next webinar we can address this. It's a very powerful metaphor of what we're responsible for and what we're not responsible for. And basically, I'll give you a little brief introduction in about 1 minute, and then we'll finish things up. It's kind of like this. God created the universe, and of course this metaphor is a metaphor, so it means it's weak in that it's not reality, it's a metaphor. But when God created the universe, God created like these laws of the universe, things like gravity, okay? But he also created these kind of moral laws of the universe. And so I like to call those kind of things the invisible fence, which is we know that when we get too close to the fence, it can get very dangerous out here, okay? And you can stick any sin you want on this fence, but we know that just use a sin of lying to someone or use a sin of adultery. I mean, you can put anything you want to on this charred fence. However, the closer we get to the fence, the more pain occurs, okay? Now, what a lot of times happens is the closer we get to this fence, this kind of natural laws of the universe, the farther it seems like we're away from God. And so what we start saying is, God left me. Where is God? Where is God in this? Well, see, God hasn't gone anywhere, but you've moved closer and closer to this fence. It's dangerous out here, guys. And again, it's just a metaphor. However, God's got this under control. As a parent, as a spouse, I promise you God's got this under control. And it makes sense out of a verse that sometimes doesn't seem to make sense in Romans 14. Let's see here. Here. If there are corrections to be made or manners to be learned, God can handle that without your help. Now, that verse totally freaks out someone who's living in this paradigm over here, this A paradigm. What do you mean? Let them get by with it? What do you mean there's corrections? I need to shame them, control them, not speak to them, yell to them, do whatever it takes to get them back in shape. Wait a second. These laws of the universe are there, and God is in control. And we can trust the fact that God can handle this. He's got it going on, okay? We don't have to live over here in A. Now, imagine, for instance, my dog, which I have a little dog, and I have an invisible fence around my house. And so I know the invisible fence will do its work, just like I know God's universal laws of the universe will do its work. However, it's interesting what happens, because when my dog hits the invisible fence, what does he do next? Derek, Steve, Brent, what's he do next?
He feels pain.
He runs back to you.
He feels pain, and then he immediately runs back to me. Okay?
And you're the one that put the fence there.
And I'm the one that puts the fence there. Okay? The metaphor is powerful. Now, however, what I want to do is the closer my son or my wife gets to the fence, remember, I've got a dog, okay? And the closer my dog gets to the fence, I want to start yelling at the dog. Or the closer my dog gets to the fence, I want to get in the way of that. Or, better yet, like if the dog hits when was the last time the dog hit the fence? He came running back to you. Imagine your dog hitting the invisible fence, running back to the house, and you spanked the dog for hitting the invisible fence.
Right. It's kind of stupid, isn't it?
Okay. But this is the kind of thing we do when we live in paradigm A. All right? You don't need to spank the dog when the dog hit the invisible fence. You don't need to get in the way of the dog. God's got it under control. You don't need to yell at the dog. God can handle that. And another way of saying this is this. In an old movie, an old biblical, I think it was called the Ten Commandments. It says this: you can't break the law. You can only break yourself against the law. In other words, it's like ramming yourself against a wall and running into it and feeling the enormous pain that happens. The law is like a great big concrete block building, and when you run into it, you don't break the law, you break yourself against the law. That's what this is like, and that's kind of what this metaphor is for. Now, if we understand this metaphor, it gives us a little bit of freedom from feeling like we have to live over here in a paradigm, because it isn't about condoning. It's about listening. It's about helping, knowing these laws of the universe were set up from the beginning of time. There is no breaking the law. You only break yourself against the law. I hope this has been somewhat beneficial. We gotta finish up right now. I'd like to get a little bit of feedback, and then we'll close things out. There may be even more questions tonight than there even is answers given, but these metaphors and these stories, the story of Bob was just that, spending some time with him over the last couple of days has been amazing. And it's just representative of I think, a lot of the things that we buy into. So we'll go around here real quick, and we'll end with Brent. Derek, any thoughts or comments you'd like to add, or any things that kind of hit you that we can celebrate?
The example of the wife with the husband that's watching the porn hit me. For those who don't know, I work with a lot of alcoholics and addicts. And when a person shifts to that paradigm of having their worth in Christ, and they're able to reach out and help, they can't always do that. That husband's not ready until he's ready. Right. And there's frustration in that, and it takes patience. Yep. And I don't know, and it's easy to fall back into that paradigm. Yeah. When that husband's not ready.
But I think Brent helping us see this invisible fence hopefully helps us, because the fruit of the Spirit is patience, right, Derek?
Absolutely.
And so what we hope is, by understanding these truths, then we can move into that patience much easier, of course, from this paradigm than we can over here. This is a paradigm of total impatience on the left-hand side. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, and the house of cards comes tumbling down right away.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. He's blaming her, she's blaming him. It's an absolute wreck. Okay. Steve, any thoughts to add here?
Two things. One, I connected with the Bob and David story, and in my case, it's uncomfortable to say this, but I felt like my anger, I wanted others to feel as bad as I did, and that was my behavior. I wanted you to hurt just as bad as I'm hurting.
Okay.
And to not have to go through that. I mean, to spare myself that whenever I can would just be amazing transformation.
Okay, so let me repeat that before you tell me your second thing. So when you have a belief system down here, then you are feeling pain. I mean, you're feeling lousy.
Yeah.
Okay, and then your action kind of moves you into one that says, look, if I'm feeling lousy, I want you to feel lousy.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what was the second thing?
Which brings me to option B, which I love, because something you said at the very beginning of tonight was how that transformation is the Spirit in you working. It's not me using these tools and actually accomplishing some things on my own. It's allowing that Spirit in me to do the work.
Yeah.
And to get the credit. And that's wonderful. It's a wonderful feeling. I'm just sitting here getting bumps because I know that's what's really at work here.
Yeah.
All my efforts and performance and all that can't hold a candle to what the Spirit can do in me.
Yeah.
Those things I thought of tonight.
Well, it's such freedom to not have to be tyrannized by whether a spouse acts out, or whether a kid gets good grades, or whether you are doing good enough at work. I mean, there's such, or whether someone likes you or not. I mean, there's such freedom to live in this grace of God that says you're already good enough. These other things can't make you better. And so you don't have to be all freaked out about it. And you just get to live in peace instead of this lousy feeling. So anyways, I totally agree. Brent, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't have, you've said so much great stuff tonight. I just, one quick thing, some of you may have heard this before, but I had a guy one day who was telling a group of us at a table that there was a guy in his men's small group that was gay, and that he was assigned to kind of work with this guy, and he says, I could never counsel a guy like that. He says, as a matter of fact, I think we should take him out behind the woodshed and beat it out of him. And some of the guys kind of laughed, and they kind of chimed in, yeah, you know. And he looked at me and he said, what do you think about that? And all I could say was, you know, until you care more about him than you do his sin, you're probably not the one to be counseling him. And I think many times that's a really good reminder that until we can be clean, sometimes maybe we shouldn't be the one, you know, getting in the middle of something. and pounding them, because there's a huge difference between condemnation and conviction. This invisible dog fence shows a perfect illustration of God's conviction. He is the one who, when we get too close to the lies, he lets us know it's going to be painful because you're not going to experience the fruits of the Spirit.
So say that again. Until we care more about the person than the sin. What did you say?
Then maybe we're not the one who needs to be doing the counseling or the correcting or
right. Maybe we're not qualified.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, just the first phrase alone, we could just put in a statement and be very powerful, right?
Yeah.
What would life look like if, or let me add one more thing here. Imagine if. I love imagine if statements. Imagine if we cared more about the person than we do about the sin.
And I think it's important with that one, Derek, to remember that the battle is not with the person, it's with the enemy who is causing them to buy into these lies.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, that is exactly right. Remember, the source of the lie of the guy looking at porn, the source of the guy flunking out of school, the lies that they're buying into that's causing this kind of behavior, those lies are coming from the enemy. And so if we're going to be angry, let's be angry at the enemy. Because the enemy is the one putting this crap, these thoughts, these lies into our heads and into other people's heads. I love the line. We've talked about it before, Brent, but I love that line. We care. Imagine if we cared more about the person than we do about the sin. That's very cool. Derek, would you pray for us tonight?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Father, thank you for this time we have together. And I just pray that we're able to use this knowledge that is from you to help other people. And I also pray that we do see that the person is more important than that sin. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Derek. Again, guys, I certainly appreciate the emails you send me. I love hearing about your stories. I love hearing about what God's doing in your life. Thank you so much for that. Thank you as well for the input from you guys tonight, all of you guys, as well as the things that you typed in, as well as Derek and Steve and Brent. We're going to be signing off here in just a few minutes, and then we'll see you back here next week.